Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Andy Zopp, and this is Chicago Newsroom 2.0. At the roundtable this week, psychologists Candice Norcott and Onyezia and teacher Emily Johanson join me to discuss the stress and anxiety so many of us are experiencing during this especially vitriolic election season. I'll also sit one-on-one with the Night Ministry CEO, Carol Sharp, to discuss the impact a recent mass shooting on the CTA Blue Line has had on her organization and the unhoused communities it serves. And Greater Southwest Development Corporation Executive Director Adrian Soto joins me to discuss a comprehensive new report that sheds light on Chicago's Mexican community. We'll get started on the other side of a short break. Stay with us.
I'm Francia Garcia Hernandez. We're on the eve of a historic presidential election in which Latino voters hold significant power. On the next episode of Presente, why exercising your electorate muscle matters. Join us at 7 p.m. via Channel 19, streaming on cantv.org and the CanTV Plus app. Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
The Labor Day mass shooting on the CTA Blue Line placed a spotlight on Chicago's unhoused community for whom the train had long become a shelter of last resort, in part because of the outreach of the Night Ministry's small team of outreach workers who help CTA riders experiencing homelessness. Joining me today to discuss the work that began prior to and continues in the aftermath of the shooting that killed 4 people is the Night Ministry CEO, Carol Sharp. Welcome to the newsroom, Carol.
Well, thank you, Andy. I appreciate you inviting me to join you today.
Really happy to have you here, particularly to share with us the impacts, because I think everybody who read the stories about that shooting was really just touched. And so maybe just before we get to that, though, let's talk a little bit about, so people know, for my viewers who don't know, tell us a little bit about the Night Ministry and the work you do there.
Yeah, so the Night Ministry is nearly a 50-year organization that has served individuals who are living unsheltered across Chicago in a number of ways. One of those ways is through our outreach health ministry, our outreach programs. It's led by our nurse practitioners. We are in 5 neighborhoods across the city every night, and we also visit encampments. We are providing medical health assessments, as well as, led by our nurse practitioners, we are providing individuals with access to case management, social service support, food, as well as resources to keep them safe and warm when the temperatures are frigid, or giving them access to things like water when the temperatures we experience extreme heat.
Really? Wow. And how long have you been the CEO there?
I've been with the organization for a little over 1 year.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you end up coming to the organization? The work is so important. What drew you there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am originally from Chicago, born and raised. I spent a good portion of my childhood navigating what I term as a non-traditional journey from the south side of the city in the Inglewood neighborhood in a foster home to reuniting with my biological mom, who is from the Rogers Park area, but biologically she was born in St. Elizabeth, Jamaica.
Oh, wow.
And so I have what I consider to be a number of character building experiences that has contributed to my ability to not only want to, but really have a passion for this type of work. We benefited from organizations that do similar work. Thinking about living in an unstable housing situation, it's organizations like the Night Ministry that are bringing the resources directly to those in need that are most vital to the ability for individuals to move to a more stable living environment. And so while I'm at the Night Ministry currently, I spent a good portion of my career at other nonprofits like the Chicago Scholars Foundation, Perspective Charter Schools, and I bring both that professional, personal experience to my work here at the night ministry. I believe that everyone has the ability to achieve beyond the scope of their circumstances, and we want to be part of their growth and ensuring that they are increasing their living, learning, and earning potential.
Right. What are some of the things that you're advocating for as part of the night ministry on behalf of the population that you serve?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that we've seen an increase in individuals who are living unsheltered. Since 2021, there are now more than 68,000 people who are living in a precariously housing situation. And in our organization, we're really focused on the evidence-based models that work, so housing first. We've recently transitioned one of our key programs from a congregate model to a scattered site model that allows individuals to be able to obtain apartments. We support them with some subsidized funding, but we also provide them with life skill development, access to case management, helping them understand things like how to budget living in an apartment or communicating with your landlord, how to maintain that space.
There are
and
a lot
those
of people
things.
who could use help communicating with their landlord, just saying.
Exactly. We talk about what's considered a natural transition, and our young people in the program are around 20, 21 years of age. And so, in a different environment, they might be transitioning to living with a roommate on a campus, or they are transitioning to a more independent living situation in an apartment or something similar, likely with a roommate. And so we've really identified that as an opportunity to say, here, let's get you into that environment now, give you the tools and resources so that you can maintain that stability. Another key initiative of ours is ensuring that we are increasing our client voice. And so we have been awarded the opportunity to lead a youth action board across the state of Illinois. And so our strategic partnerships team is working to build out that model and ensuring that we are working with young people who are in these situations to ensure that all of the programs that we are designing are in alignment with what they need based on their firsthand experience. I talked a little bit about my experience, but times have certainly changed. And we know at a foundation there's some evidence-based outreach supports that work, but we know that the society we live in is different, and we have a responsibility to evolve in that way. And then the last thing that we're really focused on most recently is mental health. You mentioned the shootings that took place, the murders that took place on the CTA, and our community is impacted by that.
Sure.
Right? There are organizations like the Night Ministry that are at the train station or riding the CTA working to deliver services, and we know that as we are trying to meet people where they are, we understand the risk that they are navigating each day.
Sure.
Just living in precariously housed situations, we know that decreases that person's lifespan, right? There's been evidence that shows that they would die earlier. And so now putting them in these situations where they're even more at risk, I mean, it really is difficult for our community. And it's important that we take care of the people who are taking care of our people, right? And so we have psychiatric nurse practitioners on our staff who are leading efforts not only with our clients, but considering ways in which we could do that for our staff
with
as well.
With your staff as well, right? So I think that's a really important point that I touched on, but you've really expanded upon, which is it's not just the people that you serve, the community that you serve, the unhoused, it's your people who are providing the services who are impacted. I think some of the victims were known clients of yours, of the Night Ministry. Is that true?
Well, we're not able to say, given
sorry.
that, no, it's okay. But given, the nature of the relationships and respective confidentiality of our neighbors, we don't, share that information.
Right.
But we know that we work with a number of individuals, and the likelihood that we have had some connection is very high. Yeah.
Right. And violence against homeless population is unfortunately not new. We lost a well-known person who was unhoused, the Walking Man, that remembered that story from a couple of years ago. I used to see him and talk to him all the time. When I was at World Business Chicago, he was on downtown a lot, who was, in a horrible crime, like set on fire. And so how do you help your clients manage through keeping safe and secure?
Yeah, well, so the first thing that we do is we collaborate and work in partnership, rather, with the city. We ensure that they understand their access to resources through the coordinated entry system. In instances where the night ministry is not able to support them, we are connecting them to other like-minded organizations. Internally at our organization, we do have a 24-hour emergency shelter where individuals can come and utilize every day. And we are providing them with case management support when they come to see us through that program as well. We also have our sort of longer term residential youth program, so a congregate model in the Bucktown neighborhood.
Okay.
And so for individuals who are pregnant or parenting young children, they can come with us and stay with us for up to 2 years, receive supports with access to workforce development, life skill development, as well as just generally having a safe place to stay for them and their children. And then similarly, we have an interim housing for transitional living as well. In that same building, we're providing young people 17 to 21 with some longer term support.
Wow, that's powerful. So if people want to help, they want to make donations, or do you use volunteers, or what's the best way if people want to support the powerful work that you're doing? What are the ways they could do that?
Yeah, well, over 80% of our funding, it comes from philanthropic efforts. And so we fundraise for all of the resources that we are able to provide. And so they could visit our website at thenightministry.org. There they will find information on ways to give, as well as information on upcoming events and our volunteer efforts. We have a number of volunteer physicians who will join our mobile health units and support our nurse practitioners. We know they're able to do things like prescribe medications. And so we have committed volunteers who are at our offices or part of our programs every day. And so we welcome all support.
Well, thank you, Carol. It's been fascinating, and we are out of time. And so I just, first of all, thank you for the powerful work that you're doing. Really appreciate that.
Thank you so
Thank you
much
for being here and sharing with my viewers. I really appreciate you, and keep up the good work. And thank you for your service, all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We'll be right back with this week's Roundtable.
Pilsen, a neighborhood bursting with Latino culture, offering a vibrant tapestry of music, art, culinary tradition, and nightlife. I'm Hugo Balta. In the next episode of Sazón de Illinois, we'll sample the stories, culture, and cuisine of an award-winning restaurant that gives this neighborhood its flavor.
The current presidential election season has been one of the most turbulent, vitriolic, and intensely angry in American history. The threats to the country's democracy and safety of its citizens, including the presidential nominees, are real and impact each of us in ways we may not even realize. To discuss the stress and anxiety of it all, as well as ways we can protect our personal peace and mental well-being, I'm joined by Dr. Candice Norcott, Associate Professor at the University of Chicago, Dr. Nneka Onyezia, licensed clinical psychologist, and educator Emily Johanson. Candice, Nneka, and Emily, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. This is a really important conversation topic that we're going to talk about. So, incredibly intense political season, it feels like. Are you seeing that stress level rise in your clients, Dr. Norcott?
Absolutely. I work with a lot of pregnant and parenting patients, and some patients that have had reproductive health issues be very personal to them. And so this election is very personal, and it's, makes them fearful, it makes them scared what life will be like. So it's very personal.
Yeah. Nneka?
Yeah, no, I would say that the anxiety levels that we're seeing in children especially have been on the rise for some time, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic. And with the election, our children overhear us, they are tuned into the news, they see things on social media. So they're aware of the vitriol that you spoke of, and it does cause a lot of anxiety and stress for them.
Right. Emily, what about in the classroom? I think we like to think about our young people at school, that's kind of their haven.
Yeah, just to echo what Nneka said, our students have access to more information than they ever have before, sometimes in ways that they shouldn't necessarily have, and they don't necessarily have the tools to make sense of all of that. So they're flooded with all this information but don't really know how to process. So we're definitely seeing some of that in the classroom as well.
So, and it's not just politics, right? There's a lot of things that are impacting people, especially our young people. I said to you that we think of our children that school is their safe place, yet we know that schools aren't safe, aren't always safe. How is that impacting your students? Are you doing gun safety drills at your school?
We are, and we're required to do so by the state. But I think the way that we talk to our children about those types of necessary drills is really important. The thing I kept thinking about with this conversation is just to make things as age appropriate as possible. So the way that we talk to our kindergartners is very different than the way that we talk about that to our 5th graders and then our 8th graders as well. And just making sure that the conversations we're having are age appropriate and not putting any kind of unnecessary fear into our children, but also making sure that they're prepared.
How about you and your patients? You're seeing also these concerns about violence with them as well?
Absolutely, and I think that, to piggyback on what Emily said, that idea of thinking developmentally and understanding that they have different needs at different ages, different levels of understanding, and just also understanding that the way you might think your students or your children need you is not necessarily what they need. So being attuned to what your students specifically need, what questions they have. It's really important that adults don't come in with talking points. This is what we're going to talk about, but instead take the stance of, I want to listen, I want to understand what you need, I want to answer your questions.
Yeah, Candice?
Yeah, that all is so important and really echoes what I'm seeing in my clinical spaces. And I would just add that I would encourage adults to check in with themselves before they have conversations with kids about, what is impacting them. How is your anxiety level? I mean, taking care of yourself before you walk into a space, because you might actually be reacting and responding to your own anxiety and your own emotions, and not really the children's or the kiddos that you're talking with.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And I also think as adults, it's not like we get used to it, but we do feel like you got to kind of walk through life, right? You have to deal with it. So you really can't be focused on the fact that the stuff you're hearing is stressful. How do you talk to your clients about, or people in your space, or I know you do talk, how do you communicate to people about how can they just remember that everything that's happening could be impacting you as an adult? Because I think we're supposed to be able to deal with it.
Well, we have lots of ways in, and so one way is checking in with your body. Is your chest feeling heavier? Are you noticing that you might be short of breath and it's not related to a medical condition? Are you just feeling more tired than usual? It's harder to get out of bed? And then another way is to check in with your thoughts and your mind. Are you having thoughts that you can't unhook from? When you want to be thinking about something else, are you finding that you're really just wrapped up in thinking about issues related to the election? And those can be really big cues that this is impacting you more than you might think it is.
Right. Emily, are you seeing any signs of additional stress or concern with your parents?
Oh, for sure. And I mean, talking about some of the access that they have that they maybe shouldn't at this point. I just had our parent-teacher conferences on Friday, and a lot of parents who are expressing fears and anxieties about what's going on in the world and what's coming next for them and their students, and just expressing their students' fears and anxieties for them. They might not necessarily have that language. We see that manifest itself in test anxiety and things like that. So to piggyback off of what Candice said, teaching some of these strategies that we use as adults early on in the classroom. We do box breathing at school. Deep breaths in, hold for 4, deep breath out, hold for 4. Some of these things that our students as little as 6 can start practicing early on, that they become tools in their tool belt that they can come back to time and time again, no matter how old they are.
I use it.
Yeah, right, exactly, me too. And then you also brought up a really great point too about just holding space for people and not necessarily telling them what they need, but just having that open environment. We try to do that with our parents as much as we can, but especially as somebody who may or may not see the students more than some of the parents do on any, during waking hours, to be that safe space for them and to be open and able to listen with whatever they come in with during that day.
Right. Well, and there's a lot of, I've been hearing a lot, there's so many triggers. And do you, so for example, there's a big thing, of course, around social media for young people at all. Are there different tools for different triggers? Is there things you talked about people when young people when they're dealing with social media versus, schools, violence threats? How do you tailor the conversation versus what the threat is?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that when it comes to things like social media, though, it's important to recognize that the way social media impacts our kids is not something that those of us that didn't grow up with social media, we might give it short shrift and not understand that it's a big deal to them. I meet with and hear from a lot of parents who say like, well, why does it matter? Why is it such a big deal? But for a lot of kids, when they're exposed to so much social media, it becomes their world. It becomes their window to the world, and they have a harder time, like Emily alluded to, with processing all that information. So one, it's really important to understand that it is important to them. With that said, though, there is a difference between what children are exposed to on social media and then when children experience trauma or when they see traumatic events happen on television or when they hear about traumatic events from their peers. So there are differences in how you would react. With social media, I think education, working a lot with teachers for sure to be able to start those conversations in school is so important to think about, okay, how do you know when it's too much? Or when you're reacting to something that maybe you might be perceiving in a different way because it was online. A lot of times engaging the community for some of those sorts of issues is super important. When it comes to trauma, though, it is important to be able to pay attention to and notice different signs that they're struggling at the point where they need professional help.
Right. I read an article or heard it, I think maybe on NPR, that there's a potential push, I saw an article that there's 42 attorney generals have signed off on putting a warning like they have on cigarettes on social media sites. What do you think of that? Do you think that's something that would be useful? I was kind of like, well, it didn't exactly work with cigarettes, but like what 13-year-old's going to go, oh, it says it could be bad for my health. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it makes a difference, or it's just kind of?
Well, I think perhaps it could be helpful in just entering it into the zeitgeist that this is something that could potentially be harmful to your health. And similarly, to invite conversation around, are you using this in a healthy way? Now, you might say no one's using cigarettes in a healthy way, so how can you use? But when I've talked to young people, part of the conversation is, how do you feel after you get off social media? When you do finally get a break from social media, how do you feel? Do you feel worse than when you started? Do you feel better? Do you feel more energized? And starting to develop a relationship with kind of this tool or this thing that you're using can be part of changing behavior, right? You track it, you monitor it, you observe how you feel, and that can be partially. But, is it starting a conversation about this ever-present issue and an object in our lives is unhealthy? Yes, and we should be talking more about it, but it's also not going anywhere.
Right, exactly. But do you? When school started, there were a lot of stories about schools banning phones completely and trying to limit students' access to social media during school. What are the ground rules at your school?
So with my 5th graders, I collect their phones and lock them on my desk in the morning each day. I kind of got parents on board with that at back to school night, and that's just sort of been our mainstay for a while. The bottom line is, if they need to make any type of call during the school day, we have a direct line out. I have all their parents' phone numbers. If they need anything, we have a working phone that works. And then everything else can wait until later. And students are pretty compliant in that regard, mostly from, hey, take my things so I don't have to worry about them going someplace in the middle of the day, someone going into my book bag. But also to help the focus a little bit more. Sure. And I know for myself, it's hard for me to focus when I'm looking at my Instagram or whatever else too. So it's been good. I wouldn't say it's perfect. And students certainly come in with things that have happened outside of school, texting, FaceTiming, and those issues make their way into school. And it's something that our Dean of Students is figuring out how to deal with. If it's outside of our jurisdiction per se, can we help with that? I'm not really sure. But when it makes its way in, which often it does and very quickly, it becomes a distraction and it becomes harmful and anxiety inducing for our students. And the bottom line is they can't necessarily focus on what they're there to do, which is learn.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that kids now are used to having so much immediate access to their people, to their friends, to their own parents and things like that. And so I for sure talk to parents, but I'm noticing in my practice, I have to adjust the way that I talk to them. I mean, when I first started this kind of work, my recommendations were to delay, giving access to a telephone and things like that, and to monitor it, look at phones every now and then. And although that's still the case, the timing of when you might give someone a phone is very different from what it was 10 years ago.
Definitely.
10 years ago, I might have said 16 comfortably, and now I think most kids and parents would look at me like I didn't know what I was talking about if I said wait till 16. And so I do recommend, though, that parents have access to their kids' phones so that it's not something that they feel like is just theirs and that everything on it is private. I also recommend that parents let their kids know that they're accessing it so that it's not a secretive thing. It's not something that they're doing and their kids are unaware of it. Because if you do find something, you want to be able to act on it without also betraying or letting them know about some breach of trust. So, making sure that the phones are understood as a tool and that, you want to make sure that they're using the tool appropriately.
How much is an issue do you see, Candice, with the fact that in the African American community, there's still a little bit of a stigma when it comes to mental health and dealing with mental health and getting services for mental health? Are you still seeing that as a barrier for people seeking help and support, or do you think more that's ebbing some?
I think it's ebbing some, and it's really through intentional work of some of our colleagues. Therapy for Black Girls is an amazing resource, and I've had people come into my office and say, I don't know, I just wanted to hear what therapy was about. Like, I don't necessarily have anything, like, what do we do here? And I love that. And I think it just speaks to, they're seeing this as a space that can be benefit add for their life, that this can be some quality improvement for their life. So less and less. I think there will always be family culture, other types of, just like the way people talk about it in families and schools in different parts of our country. That will seep in, and that will still keep people from seeking help. I think people still use the word crazy, still disparage the use of medications, and might embarrass or try to shame somebody for seeking help. But I do see that really on the decline, and I just think that there are a lot of people realizing how it benefits their lives and become living testimony. And so I hope we just get to talk more and more about how it's helped people, and the people that have felt like it's helped feel comfortable to share that, because I think that's how we start to break that down.
Right. And you talked about some of the breathing and the work that you do with your students. Any parental pushback, like send my kids to school to learn how to breathe?
Yeah, right. I haven't received any. I try, even in the way that I teach math, I try to tell my students there's all kinds of different ways to do this. I was learning long division in this algorithmic way, but here's the whole new Common Core State Standards way of doing it. My job is to provide you with a buffet of options, and you choose what works the best for you, what makes the most sense for you. And in the same way, we can also be teaching our children about their own mental health that way. Here's some strategies that I use. Here's another strategy that might not work for me, but it might work for your neighbor. I think just keeping those options out there and coming for our students to see what they latch onto and what they want to put in their tool belt is really important.
Right. I think one of the important things you said there was the I use, right? Something I use.
Yeah.
I think you personalizing it, and you were talking about it getting more comfortable. A lot more kind of public people, right? Yeah. Celebrities and others and people who are on social media are talking about their mental health and getting services. I mean, Simone Biles, right? Yeah. Took a whole year out of her sport, right. Because she wasn't mentally prepared to do what she needed to do. And I thought, very powerful and brave, but also I think for so many young people who follow her, a true role model, and I think that's had some impact as well.
Sure. Definitely.
Which I think is really important. So, we've touched a little bit about it, but sometimes it's just hard to know if someone or your child or your partner is struggling. what are signs of anxiety or stress that we should be looking for, both in adults and in children? Nneka?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think Candice, you talked a little bit about checking in with your body, and I think that is the same kind of place to start when you're trying to figure out, okay, what are the signs that I'm struggling? I think that for sure, clinicians will tell you to look for things like sleep disturbances. If you notice that you're having trouble sleeping, and it could happen on either side, you're either having trouble sleeping or you're sleeping way too much to the point where it's impacting your ability to get things done, or if your eating habits change, those sorts of changes can sometimes, be a window into difficulties that you're having that are affecting you. If your overall level of attentiveness, you're not as alert, you're not able to stay focused for as long as you normally would. Those are all signs that you may need to check in and see, do I need some help with the issues that are on my mind?
Right. And I think there are a lot of resources, both for parents and for adults looking for help online. So I think you mentioned girl therapy and others. So we would encourage people that if they're feeling stressed to do what we always do when we need to know something, we Google it.
Right.
So you all have been amazing. It's been an incredible conversation, and unfortunately, so incredible, important. It's gone. We are out of time.
Wow.
We have used our whole time. So I want to thank you both, Emily, Nneka, and Candice, so much for being here today and for the work you do with our, there's being a teacher and doing that work is really so important, and we're so glad that you're caring for our kids and helping them grow and learn how to breathe. And thank you for what you're doing as well.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
On the other side of the break, I'll be back with a bonus one-on-one segment featuring Southwest Community Development Corporation Executive Director Adrian Soto. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Bianca Cotton. Join me Mondays at 7 p.m. for Behind the Confident Smile as I sit in conversation with incredible, dynamic, and complex Chicagoans who peel back the layers, living lessons, the joy, and the pain behind their confident smiles. You can watch on CanTV 19, cantv.org, and CanTV Plus app.
The rapid growth of Chicago's Mexican population has been a remarkable bright spot in this city for the past 50 years. At first as a counterpoint to its post-industrial decline and population loss, then as an unheralded force of low-wage workers and business owners who quietly buttressed the city's economic revival in the 21st century. A recently released report begins to fill in some of the blanks in this untold story. To share more about the report and some of its key and surprising findings, I'm joined by the Executive Director of the Southwest Community Development Corporation, Adrian Soto. Before we get into the report, tell my viewers a little bit about the Southwest Community Development Corporation.
Sure, yeah. Greater Southwest Development Corporation. It's been around 50 years. Actually, this is the 50th anniversary. And we got started when our founder was in Marquette Park. He was there when Martin Luther King was marching and was hit by, infamously was hit by a brick in his forehead.
Right.
And he said he hadn't seen racism until the way that intensely until he came to the south side of Chicago.
And then he got arrested and indicted for Martin Luther King got arrested for inciting a riot, and the judge that I clerked for, which is why I came to Chicago, represented him. So we have that in common. So.
That's amazing. Yeah. So the founder was there. He was inspired to do something about that. So he created the organization to fight redlining and predatory practices by the banks at the time, and so that's how Greater Southwest was created as an organization. And again, we've been around 50 years focusing on economic, community, and real estate development.
So tell us a little bit about this report. Who did the report, and what was the focus of it? How did it come to be?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm a part of some Mexican CEOs and executive directors that have been meeting and working and mentoring each other for a few years. And we would get together and talk about what we did as organizations, the challenges, the opportunities. And all the different CEOs and executive directors have different focus areas. So some are in education, some are in the homeless sector. I'm in economic development, even immigration. And so we would all come together and talk about our communities and opportunities. And one of the things that always came up as a point of frustration was the fact that we didn't know ourselves as a community, as a Mexican community. So we talked about what's the baseline? Where should we be in terms of leadership, in terms of wealth creation, in terms of economic opportunities? And we would always come back to the fact that we didn't know our own data, our own numbers. And
it's hard to know where you're going if you don't know where you've been or where you were at, right?
At 100%. And we're all in our 40s and 50s, and we're not getting any younger. And so we thought it was time for us to collectively bring our talents together, do some fundraising, and actually collaborate and work and partner with the Great Cities Institute at University of Chicago, Illinois, and bring forth this report. So we did the fundraising. We worked really closely with the researchers to bring this forward.
Wow! And so, how long did it take to gather the data and put the whole report together? So this isn't just something you cooked up overnight in the kitchen.
No, this is years in the making. So we've been talking about this for probably close to 2 years, but it became a serious project probably 9 months or so ago, where we started talking about the need to do this. We looked at September 16th as an ideal date to unveil it and create an event and really make the rounds in terms of the press.
And for my viewers who have forgotten last week in Chicago, can you remind them why September 16th is important?
Yeah, the reason it's important, it's the Mexican Independence Day.
Yes,
so that's when all the Mexicans in Chicago get together and celebrate.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly, a big festival in the park this year.
And we wanted to counteract the negative media and stereotypes and messaging from last year. There was a lot of press and a lot of attention paid to the celebrations, and we wanted to bring forth something positive and something constructive and some recommendations on how to activate our community and improve our city.
Terrific. Well, share with us some of the findings of the report. There are some that are surprising we'll get to, but some of the core key findings.
Yeah, so my focus was economic development and looking at labor as well. And so the data showed that over half of the construction workers in Chicago are Mexican.
Wow.
So we are literally building the city. Wow. We're building the infrastructure. What was also surprising is that there's a lack of data available for leadership in terms of C-level positions, board-level positions, and even decision-making positions across government and industry. Wow. And so while we are building the city, it's hard for us to know who's making the decisions. Are those people Mexican as well? Right. We suspect that it's not from the data that's available, but that was surprising that so many of the people at the front lines building the city were from Mexican descent.
Right. Wow. That is important. Really incredible. And they make up how much of a significant portion of the Chicago's Latino population and a significant portion of Chicago's population, right?
So one in five Chicagoans self-identify as Mexican. Wow. So it's over 20% of those in Cook County are Mexican. And then surprisingly as well, over 29% of those in Kane County are Mexican. Wow. So that's the highest percentage of Mexicans across all the Cook County and the Collier counties in Chicago.
Wow. And I think it's important I was surprised by this. We talked about it a little bit before we started taping, that a significant portion of the Mexican population in the Chicago area lives outside of the city of Chicago, right?
Absolutely. I think the predominant narrative is all Mexicans live in Pilsen, a little village.
Right.
And the report really dispels that. So there's become a brown belt on the southwest side of Chicago with a huge population of Mexicans. But also important to note is that there's been a lot of migration outward into other counties as well. And so that shows the power and the patterns of migration over there as well.
Right. And I think there were also some findings in there when you talk about workforce and not just construction, but really we were talking about the fact, because of course right now we hear so much negative about immigrants and the immigrant community and what they're doing, and the fact is that the report showed that Mexicans have been a really important, critical player in Chicago's economy for some time. So talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So the report shows that we've had a presence in Chicago for over 100 years, and we show that we've been a vital part of the economy, of the growth, and even when you look at the makeup of CPS students, if you look at the percentage of young people in Chicago and the Chicagoland area, a large percentage and the majority of growth are coming from the Mexican population.
Wow, that's really important, and really just a reminder that the stories that we're hearing are just that, false news and stories. Talk a little bit about what you hope. So now you did all the work to get the report done. What would you like to see that policymakers, politicians, and others? How would you like to see the findings in the report used?
Yeah, I think something really interesting that came out about during the work of the report is we did focus groups on the different areas, including education, economic development, leadership, and other areas. We did focus groups, and the folks that we invited were of Mexican descent, and there was a difficulty and confusion of calling ourselves Mexican. So there was a lot of self-correction and apologizing, saying Hispanic, I meant Latino, I mean Latinx, I mean Mexican. So this report, we want this report to serve as kind of a wake-up call for our own community to feel comfortable talking about ourselves, about our concerns, about our opportunities. So that's point number one. We want to awaken our own community. And number two, definitely we want to awaken those decision makers that are all across the Chicagoland area to open their eyes and see us not just as a sleeping giant or as a spending power, but also as a source of talent, as a source of entrepreneurship, creativity, talent.
Well, what a powerful piece of work that you and your colleagues put together.
Thank you.
And data is power, information is power. We talk about that a lot here on the roundtable, and you've provided information, factual, data-based information that really should help people better understand a critically important part of our community here in Chicago. So
we see this report as the first of many. There isn't a lot of information available regarding Mexicans in leadership positions in terms of board, C-level, even elected officials. And so we like to change that. We also want to encourage other groups of folks in Chicago to also do reports, to know their own communities.
Well,
absolutely.
I'm sure they will. Well, Adrian, thank you so much for the great work and for coming on the show to talk about it. I really appreciate it. I'll be right back with my final thoughts on the other side of this short break. Stay with us.
I'm Ricky Watson, and I'm inviting you to join me for the new CAN TV original program, Critical Conversations. Each month, I'll share space with special guests who, like you and me, are on their journey of self-discovery and deeper understanding. Join the conversation on CAN TV, cable channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN TV Plus app. Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
The phrase, try Jesus and therapy, is one increasingly more often uttered in the Black community, a community that has historically resisted the suggestion of therapy, considering a visit to a psychologist an act of mental or spiritual weakness. According to a Psychology Today article, even in places like Los Angeles and New York, where everyone and their pet has a therapist, many African Americans, even those considered wealthy or elite, continue to hold stigmatizing beliefs about mental illness. Another study found that among Blacks who were already mental health consumers, over a third felt that mild depression or anxiety would be considered crazy in their social circles. Talking about problems with an outsider like a therapist may be viewed as airing one's dirty laundry. And even more telling is the fact that over a quarter of those consumers felt that discussions about mental illness would not be appropriate even among family. Many African Americans remain resistant to seeking treatment because they fear it may reflect badly on their families, an outward admission of the family's failure to handle problems internally. No matter how much they were suffering, they didn't want to be one of those people. I would encourage Black folks, brown folks, white folks, and any other folk within the sound of my voice to push through the stigma and unwarranted shame of seeking help whenever and however often you need it. If you had a pain in your arm or a toothache, or heaven forbid, a lump in your breast, you'd be implored to seek medical attention, heading fully into whatever therapies, medications, or treatments were available to address the issue. Your mental health is just as important as your physical health, and it deserves the same care and attention. There is absolutely no shame in tending to one of the most important gifts you have, your mental wellness. Jesus and therapy can and should peacefully coexist. For your sake, let them. Thanks for tuning in Chicago and beyond. Until next time, be well and well informed.
Reading is indeed fundamental, and a read of the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 makes it clear that utter chaos resides within the 922 pages of this dystopian manifesto. A collection of conservative and right-wing policy proposals from the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025 is a blueprint for a reshaping of the United States federal government, one that consolidates executive power while dismantling, by design and active intention, the United States as a representative democracy.
We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
And if federal bureaucrats are going to push this radicalism, we should abolish the Department of Education.
We have taken a meat cleaver to DEI already in the underlying bill. The unfinished work is Amendment 314, which I've offered, which ends all DEI funding.
MAGA Republicans want to get rid of any federal policy that treats minority communities like the LGBTQ community with respect or equity. These conservatives believe that being anything other than straight is oppositional to, quote, families comprised of a married mother, father, and their children, which Heritage calls the foundation of a well-ordered nation and healthy society.
The extreme MAGA Republican agenda is to jam Trump's Project 2025 down the throats of the American people.
Here, citizens vote for their government officials. These officials represent the citizens' ideas and concerns in government. By contrast, Project 2025 assertively promotes anti-democracy. The document is a blueprint for the creation of an authoritative government, the likes of China or Russia.
Project 2025 is a new paradigm in helping a conservative president be ready to govern day one. You know, what we have is a group now that's trying to deconstruct the United States. We are a nation state, and we are, ordered liberty. And what these folks are trying to really do is push towards a one world global government. We are now playing defense with whether it be the DEI or just really attacks on the family.
Project 2025 represents a complete restructure of the American government system. A system in which power is concentrated in the hands of a single leader or a small elite whose decisions are taken without regard for the will of the people.
Project 2025 assumption is that the president has something called unitary executive authority. This gives him enormous untested powers to essentially do whatever he wants and reduces the power of Congress to check those powers.
I will totally obliterate the deep state. We will find the globalists, warmongers, and the bureaucrats who have weaponized our justice system. I will immediately reissue my 2020 executive order restoring the president's authority to remove rogue bureaucrats. As many as 100,000 government positions could be moved out, and I mean immediately, of Washington to places filled with patriots who love America, and they really do love America.
let's take a closer look at the policies promoted in the plan, framed through 3 core areas. The first core area focuses on gutting the U.S. system of checks and balances in an effort to consolidate power under the executive branch. This includes ending the independence of the U.S. Department of Justice, thereby weakening the rule of law, defunding the FBI and Homeland Security, giving the president the power to use all the resources of the federal government to investigate and prosecute whomever he wants, including, and perhaps specifically, political opponents. Reclassifying tens of thousands of civil servants as political appointees, seeking to strip them of civil service labor protections and enabling a president to replace them with political loyalists.
As per Trump's executive order, Schedule F employees would lose their civil service job protections, which meant that replacing them would become a lot easier.
Removing 50,000 federal employees, who are you replacing them with? The number and where do they come from? I mean, even if it's not 50,000.
But ultimately, we have to devolve power from the imperial city of Washington back to the people.
Because he wrote a check to a Democratic candidate without any appreciation or understanding where his political allegiance.
We will dramatically reform agencies that take rights away from people. If they're doing their job,
why does that matter?
They're doing their job about a mission that's misaligned.
It's important to note that Project 2025 includes a database to help the president replace these independent civil servants with people who have pledged their loyalty to one political ideology.
You can expect that equity and all of the equity executive orders under Biden will be repealed early in the next administration.
I want to be very clear about this, Allie. This Schedule F order, this was drafted, as you said, in 2020. I saw the draft when it was being enacted early on in 2020, and that is when they started to replace national security experts on the National Security Council with loyalists. And, I was warned.
The second core area centers around snatching away Americans' fundamental personal freedoms by eliminating the U.S. Department of Education and requiring all students attending schools receiving federal funding to complete the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery.
In plain English, that's a military entrance exam. You heard me right. They want to require your kids to take a military entrance exam. And guess who would be exempt from that requirement, since they don't get federal funds? Private school kids. They want to take federal funding away from schools with curricula, books, or classes that address race, racism, gender, and sexuality.
Banning African American and gender studies at all levels of education. Banning books and curricula around slavery. Promoting a restrictive view of gender and racial identities in education, removing LGBTQIA inclusive curricula and policies while compelling adherence to strict definitions of gender.
The idea is LGBTQ people are inherently sexualizing by existing in proximity to children. But of course, we are parents, we are teachers, we are parts of all these communities. And so what does that mean when you have a vision of government that situates us as a threat?
Eliminating the Head Start program, closing preschools across the country, and stripping comprehensive services for low-income families. Ending more affordable student loan repayment programs, which, among other things, would result in a $4,000 increase in annual payments for borrowers with a bachelor's degree. Banning abortion nationwide, including a ban on in vitro fertilization, restricting access to contraception, and criminalizing medical abortion.
You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot? She didn't want that.
Tonight we can report the university has been forced to halt
in vitro fertilization or IVF procedures after local judges ruled that they will treat as a legal matter those frozen embryos as, quote, children.
Additionally, the plan calls for using the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as a surveillance network to monitor abortions nationwide in order to restrict reproductive freedom in states where abortion is currently legal. Eliminating no-fault divorce, which forces women to remain in marriages even if doing so jeopardizes their safety or well-being. Eliminating the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, as well as the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. Rescinding regulations prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, and sex characteristics.
The president should direct agencies to rescind regulations interpreting sex discrimination provisions as prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, sex characteristics, etc. Meaning workplace discrimination against gay, transgender, or gender nonconforming Americans would no longer be the law of the land. So, in 36 pages in Chapter 18, we've got teenagers operating heavy machinery, workers' wages in a death spiral, roadblocks to workplace representation, legalized discrimination. Who is this for?
The third core area of the plan highlights raising costs on the middle class while giving the wealthy billions, to include cutting corporate taxes by $500 billion from 21% to 18%, increasing taxes for the middle class and working families while decreasing taxes on the wealthy.
That shows Donald Trump is coming for the people who are already struggling in this country. This is his MO. He did this in 2017 with his tax cuts for the ultra wealthy and corporations because that's who he cares about.
Giving employers even more control over their workers to hold down wages. Preventing Americans from forming unions, exploiting child labor, and locking people into lower paying jobs.
Do you have a plan, and can you tell us what it is?
Obamacare was lousy health care, always was. It's not very good today. And what I said, that if we come up with something, and we are working on things, we're going to do it and we're going to replace it.
Repealing the Affordable Care Act while putting a new tax on health insurance for millions of people covered through their employer. Weakening protections for Americans with pre-existing health conditions and forcing patients to pay more for preventive health services, such as vaccines and birth control. Cutting Social Security benefits by raising the retirement age. As more and more Americans become painfully aware of the contents of this blueprint for the dismantling of democracy, the Republican nominee for president, Donald J. Trump, claims to have no connection to the Heritage Foundation or Project 2025 whatsoever.
I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it. This was a group of people that got together. They came up with some ideas, I guess some good, some bad, but it makes no difference. I have nothing to do.
Project 2025's nearly 1,000-page plan for a total MAGA takeover of America was assembled by more than 25 of Trump's own administration officials, cabinet secretaries. Trump's campaign press secretary and his advisor, Stephen Miller, star in Project 2025's recruitment video. Project 2025 is the how-to manual for Trump's dictatorship.
In the words of the indomitable Maya Angelou, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I encourage you to vote like our country's democracy depends on it, because it does. Be well.